Lindsay.
Moby.
Hi.
Hi.
So before we dive into today's episode about music therapy and music as healing and our conversation with Dr. Daniel Levitin, I wanted to talk about a few other things.
Oh, yes.
So one is we, you and me and Bagel, are going to try something new for the next episode.
Oh, yes. And I'm very excited about it.
Okay, good. Can you explain what it is? Because I don't think I fully understand.
Okay. So what we have planned is Moby and I want to do an episode of the podcast, and kind of in light of this one, which is music as a healing modality from the brain of Daniel Levitin.
Dr. Daniel Levitin.
Dr. Dan. What we want to do is an episode where we ask you, our audience, to tell us how you stay sane in what feels like apocalyptic, terrifying, challenging times. And for you to be able to send that to us,
As a voice note?
As a voicemail, voice memo.
So basically, the world is falling apart.
Yeah.
Everything is chaotic and scary. Everything's weird. The United States is being dismantled from within. But so people are going to send in little voice notes saying how they're staying sane, how they're trying to stay sane and what they're struggling with. So when I say people, I mean you, people who are listening and watching.
Yes.
And Bagel.
And Bagel. So anyone who's listening, if you have a tip or a trick for how you keep your head on straight, how you stay calm, how you find serenity, how you stay peaceful, we'd love to hear about it from you in a voice memo. And we have a number that you can call, actually, and we're going to put it in the show notes. So please call that number and let us know.
Linz, what is that number?
Like a voicemail where you can leave a note
and
for us.
It doesn't cost them anything, does it?
No, it's free.
Good.
Completely free. And
no bait and switch.
None at all. And you can just tell us in your kindest, gentlest terms what it is you do to keep your head above water.
Yeah. Two other things before we jump into Dr. Daniel Levitin. One, I notice you've been staring at the towel in my lap.
So if you're not watching this, if you're just listening to this podcast, what you will not know is that Moby's lap is covered with a towel right now. And it almost looks like you're like an old-timey guy on the front porch drinking a cup of like calming tea, the little bear by the fireplace.
I'm just too cold, so I need my little blankie.
Yeah, exactly.
So this blanket has little dog paw prints on it. So it's Bagel's blanket. And so what happened was, as I was leaving my house to come here today, I was bringing water and treats for Bagel. The treats were broccoli because she loves broccoli stems. And the water was water, filtered, reverse osmosis filtered water because Bagel only gets the best water. And as I left my house, the water spilled all over me.
Okay.
And then the other thing is what we've started doing, I think, and hope, is playing a different piece of music at the beginning of every show that is somehow tied to the theme of the show. So today's piece of music is from the album Play. It's the last song on the album Play. And I never expected anyone to hear it because it was the last song on what I thought was going to be an obscure record. And it's called My Weakness. And the reason I wanted to play it as the sort of the theme for today's show is because when I was working on the album Play, I was battling a lot of stuff in my brains. You know, alcoholism, loss of family members, loss of career, financial insecurity, all sorts of bad stuff. And making music I found to be incredibly healing and therapeutic. But listening to this particular piece of music, I would walk around Lower Manhattan late at night. I mean, like late, like 3, 4 a.m., back when I was cool. And hearing this quiet, calm piece of music in my headphones at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning was so therapeutic and healing. So that's why I have picked My Weakness as the theme song for today's episode.
And also to reflect your other weakness, which is spilling water on your pants.
I think potentially a strength, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that sounds amazing, and it really does fit with this episode. And one thing, and we will talk about this in the conversation you're about to hear. But Dan's most recent book, I Heard There Was a Secret, Chord, is so good, so cool. And my favorite part about it is that on the back of the book, there's a QR code that as a playlist to every song mentioned in the book, which is like the coolest thing I've ever heard.
And as everyone is about to learn, Daniel Levitin is he's an author. He is a doctor with a PhD. That means he went to school for a long time. Mm-hmm. But he's also a musician, mm-hmm. and has a background working with all sorts of bands and working on all sorts of fancy, famous records. Mm-hmm. And he's a music therapist, and that's how I first met him, because I was involved with the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function, mm-hmm. and he was adjacently involved in that as well. Is there anything you'd like to say about Dan? Gil Levitin, doctor?
Well, he's an unbelievably delightful person. I will say that much. One time, Dan and I stood in a field and talked to donkeys for an hour, and it was one of my most favorite experiences ever. Let me just say this one thing about Daniel Levitin, Dr. Daniel Levitin. Sometimes that man will just break out into song.
Okay.
And you will not see it coming, and suddenly the man is singing, and you're delighted, and you're like, this is a wonderful experience. So he's a great person. I feel very lucky that we got to have this conversation with him. We have all of his books. Mm-hmm. They're so good, and as we were speaking about before, it's a really weird time in this world, and I think music as something that can heal you is a powerful tool that we can all use so easily. It's so accessible. Nothing. I mean, it costs as much as music. Yeah, music costs.
Cheaper even.
And so I encourage you all to read his books. I think they're really meaningful, but also just listen to music that you like. And please do enjoy this episode.
So, first question, very important question. I have a friend named Michael.
A friend
named Michael, and if you call him Mike, he gets mad. So, are you Daniel or Dan? I'm trying to be respectful of your nomenclature.
Oh, thank you. Are you Moby or the Mobes?
Either. I'll take Chairman Moby,
Chairman Mo is very funny. I've never heard.
I like Chairman Mo.
Chairman Mo. Moisha. I'll take anything.
My friends call me Dan.
Okay, so Dan.
Dan
seems very familiar, very conversational.
I want to talk about the neuroscience of it all, but I do want to start with like your connection to music, and when you realized that music was going to be this huge door that opens up your life in all of the ways that it has. When did you realize you had this connection with music?
Well, I think it's important. I'm focusing on the word recognize, because I'm taking very seriously the way you're asking the question.
You are? Thanks.
And I know you
you're the first.
No, I mean, I know that you put a lot of time and thought into how you phrase the question. So recognition sometimes comes later than a feeling. So you can have a feeling for years and then suddenly recognize what that feeling is or what it means or implies to you. When I think back to my earliest and most powerful memories, they were musical ones. Lying underneath the piano when my mother played Schubert and Schumann and Chopin, something about this sh sound. Mm-hmm. And then hearing my grandfather's collection of big band records. Some of them novelty records, like The Syncopated Clock by Frank Duvall and his orchestra, or Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, the Disney song from Cinderella. But, also like, In the Mood by Glenn Miller. These big band things. And then early 50s love songs that were coming off the radio. So music always, when I think back on the moments of my life when I felt the most like me, they all involved listening to music or playing music. But I didn't recognize it really until I was in college studying math and science that music was what I had to do. I had to try to do that, not just as a sideline. So I dropped out of college because I wanted to see if I could make it in the music world. And so the recognition came many years later.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm jumping way ahead, but so I had this, and I don't know if you had a similar experience. I'm presumptuously thinking that maybe you did. So I had a very similar upbringing, exposed to music. I fell in love with music. Some of my most powerful emotional moments of connection involved music, even if it was just listening to a record in my bedroom.
Exactly.
And then I dedicated my life to making music, and I loved it, and I loved music culture, and I loved it reminds me of the end of the movie Almost Famous, when William Miller asks Russell Hammond, so what do you love about music? And he says, well, to start with, everything. And so I had some success making records, and then, not to make it too much about myself, but in the early...
This is your podcast, Chairman Mo.
No, but this is hopefully going to be relevant. In the early 2000s, my friend Eddie Stern, who I had grown up with playing in punk rock bands, doing drugs with, etc., he'd become a sober yoga teacher, and his father was on the board of the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function.
Connie Tomato's outfit.
Yeah, Oliver Sacks.
Oliver Sacks.
Tomato. And so Eddie said, hey, my dad is on the board of this music research, music therapy organization in the Bronx. Do you want to go visit? And to be honest, I knew nothing about it. And I went up there, and what Dr. Tomato showed me, all of a sudden, it transformed my understanding of music. I was like, oh, it's not just fun and frivolous. It's not just beauty. It's actually powerful. It's actually a healing modality. So it was like my enthusiasm was augmented and deepened. And so maybe I'm getting way ahead of myself.
No, I think this is a great kind of a moment to talk about, because we've talked about your connection to music, but when did you have that experience of realizing the connection between music in the form that we all experience and the kind of bigger, deeper
as healing,
like when
promoting
did that,
neurogenesis, et cetera, decreasing stress hormones.
What kicked off that part of the journey?
Well, so like the other question about, understanding or recognizing the importance of music in my life, the healing part I only recognized retrospectively, looking backwards. I had used music as a way to understand my own emotions, to understand the emotions of other people. When I would find their reactions or their emotions inscrutable, somehow music would explain it to me. I could put on a song and understand another person's emotional state better than just interacting with them. And I mean, certainly like any caring, sensitive human who pays attention to the world, I've had depression or feeling hopelessness, and music has been able to, or hurt, and music has lifted me out of that. But I never really thought of it that way in a medicinal way until much, much later, and that was really just 10 years ago. So late to the game, really, when I had been in the music cognition world for a long time and music and brain stuff, and I kind of peripherally was aware of these stories of Alzheimer's patients, coming alive when you play the music. But when I started doing research for the new book, I heard there was a secret chord. That's when I saw that it's really only in the last 10 years that enough work had been done to show music's efficacy in medical settings. So Connie had been running this institute for a long, long time with Ann Oliver, and she had founded it, the IMNF, and it was largely based on intuition and anecdote, and there wasn't a lot of science behind it. The science came later. But what convinced me was studies of people with Alzheimer's who who couldn't relate to the world at all. And let me unpack that, because it's a really powerful story. With Alzheimer's or any other profound memory loss, what happens to a person inevitably at some stage, they don't recognize their loved ones anymore. They don't know where they are or how they got there. And they may even look in a mirror and not recognize themselves. Think about how disorienting that is. Nothing makes sense. So one of two things happens. They either become violent, which is what happened to Glenn Campbell towards the end of his life. He started beating on his wife because he didn't recognize her. And when a patient becomes violent, you have to sedate them, put them in a home. Or often, if they don't become violent, they just fold in on themselves and shut down and become almost catatonic. And there's a scene in the movie Alive Inside that Oliver narrates where Henry Dwyer, who's been in a nursing home in the Bronx, and nobody's heard him speak for months, every day he just sits there like this. Why? Nothing makes any freaking sense.
To interrupt for 1 second, Lindsay, have you seen that movie?
I have not seen it.
Oh boy. So on your watching list, what you're describing is one of the most beautiful moments ever captured on film.
It is. Oliver brings Henry an iPod, plays him music from Henry's youth, in this case, Cab Calloway, and you see Henry just sort of like it's an electroshock. Something wakes him up, and he starts singing along with the music. And off camera, I know that interaction with the music lasted for days. He became talkative. He started interacting with people. What had happened for him neurologically as well as psychically is that he had gotten back in touch with that self, that sense of self he had lost to the disease. Now he's reconnecting with who he is or who he was. And of course, all of us are who we were. I mean, we have this continuous thread of being and self. Very, very powerful. So that awakened me, borrowing the term from Oliver Sacks's book, Awakenings. It awakened me to the real science behind this. Mm. And as somebody who trained primarily as a memory researcher, this really resonated with me. And then a second thing that really awakened me to this realization that it was real was work with Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease that destroys
the myelin sheath, right? Or is
that's multiple sclerosis?
MS, yeah. Okay.
But they're related, because when you lose the myelin sheath, which is the insulation around the neurons, like insulation on the wires in your house or in this microphone, you get short circuits in the brain, and it can create movement disorders. Parkinson's is damage to the circuits in the region of the brain called the basal ganglia that allow you to move smoothly and continuously rather than in a herky-jerky fashion. And many Parkinson's patients can't walk. They start to walk and then they freeze, or they can't get started. And we found now a ton of evidence that if you play music that has the same tempo as their gait, their natural walking speed, there are millions of neurons that start firing in synchrony with music, with the tempo. Whether you know it or not, and whether you intend it to or not, that's just the way the brain works. And so once that happens, the music becomes an external clock for the Parkinson's patient, who can then walk. And it gets to the point with a little bit of training, they can just imagine the music playing and be able to walk.
I mean, this was the first time I went up to the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function. Dr. Tomeno showed me a video, and I almost to the point where I felt like I was being punked, where a woman, whether it was Parkinson's or some type of aphasia, if I'm using that word correctly, I think I know what it means.
Aphasia is an ability to understand or express language.
Okay. So a wheelchair-bound client / patient. Are we allowed to say patient? Client, patient.
I say patient.
Okay. And they played one of her favorite songs from childhood, and she was able to stand up. And the way Dr. Tomeno explained it, and keeping in mind I am a college dropout, so this is her dumbed down version to me, is that in the ye olden days of neurology, there was phrenology. We've all seen those like maps of the brain. Like,
you read lumps on the head to figure out.
This is your criminal center. This is the part of you that likes the queen. This is, et cetera. And there's some legitimacy to that. Like the brain does, different areas of the brain have different tasks. And the way she explained it, and I'd love to know if I'm correct in my understanding of it, is parts of the brain get damaged that affect speech, that affect movement, but that music actually has the ability to affect larger regions of the brain that in a way bypass. I'm probably grossly oversimplifying or incorrectly describing it, but that music can basically activate areas around those damaged areas.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Oh, so I'm actually not wrong?
No.
Hey, Linz.
Hey, you're right.
In fact,
I'm not as stupid as I thought I was.
No.
Nobody's as stupid as you thought you were. The way that music works is it activates every area of the brain that we so far mapped. So it's a unifying force in the brain. It ties together regions of the brain that might not otherwise communicate due to injury or disease, or might not communicate just because they've never communicated before. It ties together the left and right hemispheres, the front and the back. It's very powerful in that way. And what you brought up is a story that I just love, which is how you would use the word aphasia. Aphasia is an inability to understand language. If it's receptive aphasia, you don't understand what people are saying. If it's expressive aphasia, you understand what they're saying, but you can't get the words out. Part of that is a motor problem, because to articulate words, you need to control fine movements in the tongue and the jaw and the lips. You have to say things, you have to do these motor movements in a very particular order and at a particular time, or you sound disfluent or you stutter. Mm. And so Gabrielle Giffords was shot in the head, and she experienced expressive aphasia. She could not speak.
Just as I want to contextualize that a little bit, because a lot of people who listen to this are overseas. So Gabby Giffords was an elected representative. In my ignorance, I don't remember if she was a senator.
She was a congressperson
in
Arizona.
And a crazy right-wing lunatic shot her in the head, and she survived somehow magically. And I just wanted to contextualize it.
Yeah.
So she was killed by someone who would
Not killed.
Not killed. She was shot in the head, injured seriously, and she's also the spouse of Mark Kelly.
Yes,
who's now a senator. The astronaut who's now a senator from Arizona. So I just wanted to contextualize.
Thank you for that
a little bit.
Yeah. No, in my self-centeredness, I did not think to unpack that. I appreciate you bringing me back to the real world. So shot in the head, she could not speak. But because music activates so many parts of the brain, and because according to research in my own laboratory that's now been replicated in other laboratories, the music circuits in your brain, think of them as electrical circuits. The music circuits in your brain are older evolutionarily than the language circuits. So they're deeper down in the brain. They're more resilient and robust to injury or disease. Those music circuits were intact. So she could still sing even though she couldn't speak.
It just reminds me when I went to the Institute for Music Neurologic Function, when they were describing this to me, the only way to describe it, it's miraculous. Like people can sing who can't speak. People can dance who can't walk.
Right.
People can emote when they're shut down. Like it's actual like magic, like it's miraculous magic.
Is it just memory that does that? Is it your brain grasping on to something that feels familiar, or is it just the rhythmic nature of music that you think is what the brain finds that comfort and connection in?
And also to expand on that question, not to overwhelm you with too many questions, is from an evolutionary perspective, why? Like, yes. What has given music this power over us? What is that it's embedded in our neurologic DNA? Like our brains are almost like hardwired from before birth to have this relationship.
They are. So let me just circle back and say Gabby learned to speak again by learning to sing what she needed to say. So she underwent 9 months of training, things like, I need a glass of water, or show me to the bathroom. She could sing those things fine, but by repeating the singing of them, she was eventually able to say them normally.
That's
because she built up new circuits, scaffolding on these intact music circuits. She rewired her brain's speech circuits based on the intact music. But you're asking the huge question, why? How does this happen? And evolution did not, the core tenet of evolution is that everything evolved to solve a specific adaptive problem. So music evolved separately from language. Vision evolved separately from hearing. They were separate problems that needed to be solved. And as a result, you end up with the brain that's kind of a bunch of different special purpose tools. The brain is most like a Swiss Army knife. It's got like 20 different, one of those big fat ones. It's got 20 different things, each for a separate purpose. Now, of course, you don't have to use them for the purpose they were intended. Your Swiss Army knife has a corkscrew, but if you need to put a hole in your drywall and you don't have a nail and a hammer and all you've got is a corkscrew, you can sort of figure out how to use it to put a little hole in there. And if you've got the file on your Swiss Army knife, but you need to turn a Phillips head screw, you can use it for that. So the brain has all these different tools, and there's a lot of redundancy. So I'm looking at the beautiful lighting that you put in here. At some point, an electrician came in here, presumably before the walls were up, and he ran wires from a circuit box to, he or she ran wires from a circuit box to these lights, and then you put the drywall up. Now, if this was a high is the wrong word. If this was a hospital or something where you could not afford to have the lights go out, if this was an operating room, in addition to those wires from the circuit box, an electrician might attach wires to a generator or attach the circuit box to a generator. You might have separate lights that only go on battery powered when these lights go off. You'd have all these redundancies. So the brain has these massive redundancies. When the speech system doesn't work, the music system can kick in. And a lot of times they work together, like when we listen to music with lyrics. But a lot of times they're called upon to do separate things. Similarly, this is a little bit obscure, but a lot of what we know about the auditory world comes from our sense of sight. You may not realize it, but when you're in a conversation with somebody and you can watch their lips move, you're much better at understanding them than if you can't see their lips move. It's because your eyes are disambiguating what is being said. The auditory input is imperfect. It's impoverished. There's things missing. Somebody might make a noise over what somebody's saying, or you might cough, or there's an airplane and you don't hear it all. But if you can see the person, the lips, even if you're not a professional lip reader, fill in a lot of the information. So you've got massive redundancies, which is, I hope that ties up the whole evolutionary question.
I mean, so here's my dilettantish, ostensibly poetic, but maybe there's some legitimacy to it in terms of understanding, because I'm fascinated by heredity that isn't easily explained. Like, for example, fingernails, pretty easy to understand. Like, it enables us to claw and dig in the dirt and
scratch and itch.
Yeah, all sorts of things. Eyeballs, pretty easy to understand. Eyeballs behind a nose, pretty easy to understand because it protects them, et cetera, et cetera. Three things that have always sort of baffled me from a hereditary perspective: laughter, crying, and music. Because there's no obvious, crying for a baby, sure, because if it's in distress, it cries and people pay attention to it. But solitary crying, what's the evolutionarily what's the utility there? Same thing with laughing. Like there's no survival benefit conferred by laughing. In fact, maybe it identifies you for predators. But music is the one that, like, we have some of, as you're describing, as your books describe, so much, the most powerful relationship to and reaction to music on a subjective and objective level, and because it doesn't, you could also say, well, that sort of exists in an olfactory way. Like we respond to scents, we have perfumes, etc. It responds to taste as well, like a developed sort of like refined sensory, hereditary sort of inheritance. But music is the one that has always baffled me, especially because we've dedicated our lives to it. So here's my dilettantish theory that you guys can ridicule as me just being a new age nonsense person, is it's simply the survival benefit conferred was understanding the environment at a great distance. Sight is great. You can't see very far. If you're in a valley, you can't see over the hill.
Or if you're in a cave.
In a cave, you can't see, but like you can hear thunder.
You actually talk about this I heard there was a secret chord of the evolutionary purpose.
Oh, okay, then
hearing.
I'm just
no, but you're touching on something that is foundational to the entire experience of hearing and
hearing a fire. Same thing, smelling. Like you could smell a fire, but if the wind's blowing the wrong way, you can't hear it. You can't smell it.
Whereas exactly, yeah. You can hear in the dark, and you can hear at a distance.
And hearing
is fundamental to survival.
Like we in the middle of the night, and I'm sure you deal with this in your book, and I apologize, I probably didn't get to that section yet. There was a lot of books to read. But a bear walking 300 yards away, our sense of smell is not good enough to distinguish that bear from its environment. There's too many other sounds.
Oh, you don't know the bear
too many other smells, rather.
You
can't smell them. We can't see them, but you can hear that simplest thing, like the scratching. And you're like, oh,
that's right.
So like maybe that's self-evident, but that's my understanding of how, from a hereditary perspective, we have evolved such a profound relationship to audio.
But then it takes it a step further when you get into music, because yes, hearing is so important, but our brain, there's hearing for survival, and then there's hearing for joy and connection, which does a whole other thing. So
you're absolutely right, both of you, as far as I know.
Yay!
That 100%.
I know, finally.
The hearing is fundamental.
That'll sustain me for a couple of weeks.
Hearing is very ancient. Fish can hear, and fish are separated from us by 200 million years. So I have koi fish, and I can say it's Crunchies time, and they all gather for me to give them their little fish kibble. So hearing's fundamental, but then the question of why music, why not just sound? I don't know how to answer your laughter question. And we'll set aside crying for a moment. But I suspect, based on what I've read by philosophers and neuroscientists and evolutionary biologists, and there's been a lot written about this in the last 20 years, the evolutionary basis of music. It didn't evolve for one thing. Like many evolutionary adaptations, the music system evolved for several different reasons. And the way that what we may have used it for 20,000 years ago may be entirely different than what we use it for now. So things can change. Just as an example, not to be overly pedantic, but I am a professor, so we're a retired one anyway. We think of the bird's wings as having evolved for flight, but they didn't. They evolved to keep the bird warm. They have all the properties that help keep a bird warm. It was only some time later, hundreds of thousands of years later, maybe millions, I don't know, I'm not a biologist, but I do know that once the wings were there, they became co-opted for flight. But that was not their original evolutionary purpose. So if we're going to dive deep here into the evolution of music, we have to imagine that whatever purposes it served or problems it solved 100,000 years ago might be different than the way it's used now. I don't think we evolved for Britney Spears, for example. But going way back, as a species, we've only had written language for 5,000 years. We've been around for 50 to 200,000 years, depending on how you want to define human. But for most of our history, we could not write things down, but we still had to remember things. We had to remember kinship, relationships, so you wouldn't end up procreating with too close a relative. We had to remember family histories and lore and stories, like don't go over that mountain over there. My uncle went over there, a few years ago, and the neighboring tribe killed him because they're very aggressive. So how do you teach something like that? Well, you would write it down. You might write down a story like The Boy Who Cried Wolf or an Aesop's fable kind of a thing. Or you might embed this information in song. Story. And when you look at contemporary pre-literate hunter-gatherer cultures, and there are millions of people living that way around the planet, subsistence living, they don't write, but they have songs for how to build a raft or a canoe that's airtight, how to cook that plant so that it won't poison you, but it's very nutritious if you cook it properly. This is the way to get to the well if the route is blocked by a fallen tree. This is how you navigate to get there. All these things are embedded in song because the mutually reinforcing features of rhyme and rhythm and accent structure help to create an indelible memory, which is why we get earworms, why we remember music much better than we remember other things. But that's just one. That's just one purpose. Another purpose is that we find music comforting. It can comfort us for reasons we don't understand, probably going back to mothers singing to their infants, but a whole neurochemical system evolved for comfort, the prolactin system. Prolactin is what's released in mother's milk when a mother is nursing, and both the mother and the infant have experienced this increase in prolactin levels. Prolactin is a soothing, tranquilizing hormone. And prolactin's released when we listen to sad music or comforting music. So that's why we have that response to sad music. When we're sad, we feel comforted by it. We don't typically feel worse off, like we want to kill ourselves just because some sad music came on.
So it's very, and I'd never thought of it this way, but it's these incredibly powerful hereditary systems that have, like, I think of sense of smell. Like you said, like no one evolved a sense of music to listen to Britney Spears, which, just be clear, it's not maligning Britney Spears. It's just saying that was not the hereditary goal. That's not the end goal of evolution. The same way...
Evolution did not say 50,000 years from now there's going to be this singer who used to be a Mouseketeer.
Yeah.
And we want to get everybody ready for her.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was.
Or maybe it was. Maybe it was.
But like sense of smell did not involve to sell Tom Ford cologne.
That's right. That's right.
Sense of taste did not... The end goal of taste is not in and out.
Are you wearing Tom Ford right now?
I don't wear cologne because I think it smells like poison. But in any case, it's this, you develop the survival benefit that's conferred by having an orientation, like a profound orientation towards smell, towards sound, etc. Because it also, for example, if it was only language, there would be no such thing as instrumental music. We would have no reaction to instrumental music. And you listen to Moonlight Sonata, listen to Rhapsody in Blue, listen to these, instrumental pieces of music, and they're so powerful. So clearly there's the language part of music, which is the rhyming songs, but just the music itself. That's a really, am I saying nonsense?
No, not at all. I mean, that's an important piece that, I didn't account for in my, music as knowledge preservation, because I'm talking about lyrical music there. But the ability of music to comfort, to bind people together, such as we see in sporting events or political rallies, even music without lyrics. The ability of music to inspire us. A lot of instrumental music does that. And so there, I think the way we're currently thinking about the evolution of instrumental music now, music is a highly structured medium. There are only 12 notes. Yeah, we can glide between them and such, but really there are 12 notes. And you can say, well, in language, there's only 26 letters in the alphabet, in our alphabet.
In DNA, there's only 4. Yeah.
Yeah. But the combinations of them create a lot of possibilities. And in our musical system, at least in Western tonal music, we build up certain expectations. So if I go ba da 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 da,
The last one?
yeah, it feels obvious that it has to go there, but I don't have to. I could go ba da 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 da. I can violate your expectation. Ba da 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 ba. That feels a little bit unresolved. It has some momentum. It's because of its structure and the conventions of music that our brains have learned, and our brains have learned those conventions, that music can be very, very powerful. And here's why. Whether you know it or not, and whether you're a musician or not, there are regions of your brain that are trying to predict what's going to come next in music. There are general purpose. Basically, your entire brain, if nothing else, is a giant prediction device. That is its function, to figure out what's going to happen next. Is that thing that's coming towards me going to bite me? Is it going to be friendly? Is it going to comfort me, like Bagel? Mm-hmm. Or maybe Bagel bites, I don't know. But, with that sound
Only
that
if
I
you're
just
trying to
heard.
express our anal glands.
Yeah. That sound I just heard. Does it mean thunder? Does it mean rain?
And one other I do apologize for interrupting. One other facet of that that's quite interesting is, yes, we love predictability, we love structure, but also there's a huge survival benefit conferred with adaptation. So that when you were doing those scales, we're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. But in the past, we've benefited from combining things in interesting ways, combining electricity with plastic with glass and coming up with a computer. Combining metal with gasoline and coming up with airplanes.
But it also has an element of telling a story, and then you say, but then.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, what's next?
The benefit there of, like, imagine 200,000 years ago saying, well, we always get our water from over there, but have you considered that?
And then you're like, well, what's going to be over? Yeah.
The benefit. So it's like the marriage of novelty, because same thing with food, with scents, with everything. If you had a perfume that was just one note, no one would buy it.
Yeah.
If you had food that was just sugar, apart from Lindsay, no one would want to eat it. It's the interest. It's that novelty. And sorry if I'm stating the obvious. The novelty within a framework of predictability.
Wonderfully put. You just, I couldn't have said it better. The brain is a giant. The brain's a giant prediction device, but it thrives on learning new ways to complete ideas or events.
Yeah, like a tool 50,000 years ago, the guy who said, oh, that's a rock, it's nothing more than a rock, his genetic line, most likely, or their genetic line would die off. The guy who sees the rock and is like, oh, that's a tool for making food. That's a tool for making clothes. That's
shelter.
It's shelter.
Back them up.
I can use it as a weapon.
It's a pet.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are the guys whose genetic, or guys in a genderless sense, whose genetic lines prosper.
Exactly right. So we are a species that wants to learn new things, and we developed a neurochemical system for that. When you learn something new, that and the definition of learning is something that you didn't know before. As you said, Lindsay, the story doesn't have to go this way. It seems like it's going this way, but actually there are other ways to do it. Or as you said, that's not the only way to get to the well. There's this way and there's this way. Mm-hmm. And, maybe we could even dig a new well if if we know where to look. I mean, there's if the route to the well is blocked, maybe we can put a log over it and with the impediment and get to it. All these different ways of solving problems. All of our ancestors somehow solved a certain number of problems and delighted in solving them. We are the descendants from problem solvers. And we're descended from ancestors who managed to survive long enough and managed to be attractive long enough in order to procreate. And it's probably obvious, but none of us has an ancestor who failed to procreate. Not a direct one, yeah. Right? So procreation is an act of solving problems.
So I would love to move into talking about the ways that we and our listeners of this podcast, ways that we can use music in our daily life to improve our experience of humaning. And by that, I mean, is there a way we can use music to be more creative? Is there a way we can use music to do better things in this world?
So I'll start with the second one first.
Okay.
I think the whole purpose of art in general, and music in particular, is to spark our imagination, to connect us with ideas that we might not otherwise encounter, feelings and thoughts and emotions that might not be our own, but that are someone else's. The actors, the writers, the composers, the musicians, the novelists, the playwrights, the painters, to experience worlds that we are not in through the eyes of the people who are in them or who imagine them. And it's by being able to imagine a better world than the one we live in that we can eventually create that better world. We can build it, but only if we can imagine it. And the purpose of the arts are to push us into engaging with those acts of imagination.
And to sort of inhabit that better world in the short term that gives us a sense of what that better world might be like. Mm-hmm. Taking refuge, for example, watching The West Wing and being like, oh, that's right, politics can be sane and rational and compassionate. Watching 30 Rock and thinking, oh, that's right, people can be smart and engaging and not hate each other. Listening to Rhapsody in Blue and thinking, oh, that's right, the world can be interesting and complicated and fascinating.
To use art to act as if.
Yeah. And part of the power of instrumental music is that although, the notes have been specified, the images that you create from them in your own head and heart are yours alone.
So to that end, okay, this one I'm interrupting and I apologize, but I only have my two main things I want to talk about before we wrap up. And Lindsay has some other things as well. One is a lot of people in the world of music therapy will say that the individual's relationship to the music has some objective strength. And I'm just wondering what you think, because my understanding is a huge part of how we relate to music is subjective. Like there's no one size fits all. The example I give is if, like Lindsay's brother might find great comfort listening to Metallica and Pantera. If you play it for my aunt, she's probably not going to find a lot of comfort listening to Pantera. Someone from Thailand might find great comfort listening to gamelan music, whereas I'm certainly not going to. To me, it sounds like pots and pans falling downstairs. So the subjective relationship to music versus the idea of an objective musical standard?
Well, I think they can coexist. So the particular music you use is entirely subjective and idiosyncratic. And you know this from your own experience. Even if you have a favorite song, you don't want to hear it all the time, right? So, or if there's a song that normally comforts you, it may not comfort you on this occasion. A song that normally inspires you may have become worn out. It may have worn out your neural grooves, and you have to set it aside for a while before it'll inspire you again. So that is all subjective. When we talk about music medicine, a music therapist is not going to write a prescription and say, "Oh, you're depressed. Take 2 Joni Mitchell songs and call me in the morning. We'll see how you're doing." 2 Adele songs, whatever. But the objective part is that it objectively works. If you allow the listener or the patient to be involved in the choice of the music, we've seen a lot of objective science. I've seen in my own laboratory, I can lower your heart rate by 5 beats per minute reliably listening. If you listen to music that you have chosen and that you find relaxing, I can lower your blood pressure. I can raise your heart rate if you're exercising and I play music at a tempo just faster than your normal running rate. You can run faster. So those are objective.
Yeah, because there's, as we know, there are quite a lot of people trying to, and I'm not going to be critical, but who are trying to monetize music therapy.
Oh, you have to be critical about charlatans.
Okay. And they'll say things like, "Oh, this frequency is the magic frequency.
No,
if you
it is
buy
not.
our frequency."
No.
I love that because, and Jonathan, who edits this, has a lot of feelings about, the like however many hertz as like the tone that is the healing tone. You talk about this, and I heard there was a secret chord, and I love that because I feel like it definitely debunks a little bit of that prescriptive tones as healing.
I think we have an obligation to call out charlatans and pseudoscientists and snake oil salesmen because they don't have a right to make a living off of the gullible. And the people who are ill-informed due to no fault of their own. They use a lot of pseudoscientific wording, and they talk about things, and you think, oh, well, they must really be informed because they're using all these words from science, and I wasn't so good at science, so I'm going to trust them. But just as one example, I recently did a study of the top 20 Spotify relaxing songs, and I hooked people up to measurement equipment. So we got their heart rate, their respiration rate, their core body temperature, their blood pressure, electromyogram, which is muscle tension in the facial muscles.
I got that.
Yep. And we compared that to music that they brought in themselves, that they said, "Oh, this relaxes me." And they weren't the same songs. So the top 25, like if you were to pay extra, this is not anything. I'm not trying to slag Spotify because these are just. It's not like Spotify's trying to sell you a playlist, but just so you know, the top 20 relaxing playlists by view count or listen count, they did nothing at all. But we could reliably alter a person's physiology by the music they had chosen themselves. And I've tried these commercial, buy our relaxing music. They do nothing.
Yeah. It reminds me when, again, going back to that moment when I was first brought to the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function, and Connie Tomeno and Oliver Sacks were showing me their work, something struck me, and I'm going to try and keep this concise because I feel like I'm taking up both of your time with my randomness.
You're worth it.
There's a monk named Joachim di Fiore, and he basically talked about the evolution of humanity is getting to a point where we no longer need fake experts, where we can have the authentic relationship to healing. For example, do we need religious leaders to tell us about spirituality? Do we need some guy who starts a company to sell relaxing music to tell you about your relationship to music? It's like...
And your relationship to your body. Here's what I say.
Yeah.
My body, my choice.
And the experts, sometimes I like experts. If I break my ankle, I want to go to an ankle expert. But it's something that I'm a little bit obsessed with, is there's so much free healing in the world. going for a hike, petting Bagel, having a conversation, listening to music. It's free. It reminds me a little bit, I went to a life extension group meeting conversation with fancy people, like Nobel laureates. One of the founders of Google was there, and they were talking about life extension. And at one point, I raised my hand and I said, well, what about being a vegan and exercising? And one of the Nobel laureates was so honest with me. They said, yeah, all that stuff's great, but you can't make money from it. And so I'm all in favor of people making money if they can perform a service to humanity. But there's, to your point, charlatans and snake oil salesmen who are trying to say that they have access to the truth. They have access to healing, when the truth is so much healing and well-being is free.
And this gets back to your question, which I didn't answer because I got distracted. What can we do in our lives, Lindsay?
Yes.
We're doing it. We're talking about things we can do that are free. We're talking about finding your own music. It's out there. There are 200 million songs now on streaming services. Every song that's ever been recorded is available somewhere, and there are 100,000 new songs being uploaded every day. It's a magical time for creators to meet their audience and for audiences to discover new music that will be healing for them.
That touches them, that touches you deeply.
Yes. And so the answer is find music that you like. And there's a thrill in discovering something new. The software companies in the coming 18 months are going to get better at making recommendations. Right now, they're not so good at it. But AI is going to get better at tracking your listening history. And it already knows through your smartwatch how your body reacts to different kinds of music. I think in the foreseeable future, AI recommendations for some artist who you otherwise wouldn't know about, who happens to be stuck in the Appalachians or in Senegal, but they're making amazing music that you would find healing and relaxing or inspiring or whatever your therapeutic goal is, pain relieving. They will get their music to you and you'll find it. For now, go through your own listening history. We've done surveys where we've asked 20,000 people in 10 different countries how they use music. And the average person already knows what music will help them wake up in the morning, what will help them sleep, what will calm them after an argument. As Moby says, as Chairman Mo says, go with your instinct there. You know, you don't need some fancy expert to tell you. And trust your gut there and listen to your body and your spirit.
Yeah, and believe that it works.
And play an instrument.
That's what I was going to ask you about next, is creating your own music, even if you're not a professional musician.
It's crazy how we think about music. You never see we're in Los Angeles, there are these city basketball courts. We have city tennis courts that anybody can use. I've never heard somebody say, I'm no Steph Curry, so I'm not going to play pickup basketball.
Yeah. Or I'm not the guy from Free Solo. I'm not going to go hiking up Mount Hollywood.
Exactly right. What was that guy's name?
Joey Free Solo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joseph, sorry.
Yeah.
Joey friends.
Alex Honnold.
Yes, Alex Honnold.
Or nobody says, I'm no Martin Luther King, so I'm never going to talk. I'm no Wolfgang Puck or James Beard. Don't let me in a kitchen. Mm. Nobody says that. But so many people say, oh, I don't sing. I don't play an instrument. Or why should I bother taking lessons? I'm never going to be a professional.
You're right. It doesn't apply to anything else. Like, it's kind of like saying, well, I'm not a doctor. I shouldn't be putting on my own Band-Aid.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely like, I hadn't really thought about how music, even like someone saying, I'm no James Cameron, I'm not going to make a video for TikTok.
Right.
I'm no Ansel Adams.
I'm not going to take a picture. Right.
Yeah. I'm not going to post my photos on social media. Everyone does everything else in the most wonderful dilettantish way, but not music. Yeah.
And so, learn an instrument. I would recommend a keyboard because all the notes are there and you don't have to struggle getting a good sound. You can make a C as good as Herbie Hancock can.
I don't know how anyone learns to play guitar. Like,
I would not recommend.
So hard, and it hurts the fingers.
That's the thing. It's like you have to be a very bored 13-year-old to spend hours and hours and hours training your finger to go like that and to
do
press
funny
into
things.
steel.
Yeah, no.
Like I remember the first time I tried to play an E chord, it probably sounded like.
That's what it sounds when I play it.
Yeah. No,
but the piano is you can learn a chord very easily.
Now you can play.
That took years.
Yeah.
So no, don't learn guitar.
No.
Okay, well, but
painful.
piano it's an easier
And you can get electronic keyboards at the mall. Even if you're not that good, you can play the notes.
Yeah.
Very rewarding. And you can learn at any age.
Yes.
My grandmother, when she was 80, she was an immigrant. She confided to my mother and I that she woke up every morning and sang God Bless America because this country took her in.
Oh.
Other countries would not. God Bless America was written by another immigrant, Irving Berlin. And so we went to the Radio Shack and we got her a little electronic keyboard and I put pieces of masking tape on it with numbers so she could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. God bless her. And by the time she was 81, she had removed the little pieces of tape because she had memorized where her fingers went. When she was 82, she had worked out a little rudimentary left-hand harmony. And she played that keyboard every morning and then learned a few other tunes and played it every morning until she died at 97. Now, this is not an experiment. It's not randomized control. I didn't give some old grandmothers keyboards and other old grandmothers not keyboards and see who lived longer. But it filled her with joy and a sense of accomplishment and agency. And it filled her with gratitude that she could play this song to the country that took her in.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I
Whoa,
love that
jinx.
stuff. Weird.
Yes.
Pinky swear.
Stop stealing my songs.
And I think that's something that everyone can go get a $50 keyboard, or you can get one on Craigslist for free that someone's giving away, or borrow someone.
Make mistakes and be messy and be creative and don't. I feel like with a lot of people when they approach creativity, they think they have to be very good at it.
Paul McCartney just did this interview that you said something 2 sentences ago. Paul McCartney did this interview recently where he said, the thing that made the Beatles work is we made a lot of mistakes, but we went with them.
Yeah.
Now, those weren't his exact words, but he talks about all the mistakes that they ran with, the mistakes, the happy accidents.
I want to just ask one quick question before we let you go, because I love all of this, and now I'm like, I should probably start taking piano lessons again.
Or no, just start playing.
Or I'll just start.
Just put your fingers on a keyboard and go bang, 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 boom.
Great, I can totally do that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
Do you have a piano?
I do.
What the?
I do play sometimes.
Bagel doesn't love it.
But Bagel gets worried because I'm really bad, and she's like, girl. But Bagel's going to have to get used to it. I'll get better if you let me play, Bagel. This is just about your research of, what's the next frontier for you as far as all of your research goes? Is there some place you haven't been yet that you're planning on going, or what's going on there?
There's two big things on the horizon for me. One is we're doing some more brain scanning studies, and I've just been talking to a colleague at Stanford. We'll use the scanner up there because I've done all my brain imaging studies on that scanner, and it's a good idea not to switch scanners mid-career because every scanner is a little different. So if you want to compare your results, but we're going to be looking at it more closely at what's actually going on in the brain when people are healed by music, and we're going to try and play music that people say is relaxing, and then manipulate things, allow them to manipulate the tempo and the timbre and things like that to see if they can optimize it for themselves, because software allows you to do that and figure out precisely what's going on in the brain there. We want to create a larger database of studies that show not just that music works as medicine, but how it works. And the how isn't just some pointy-headed scientific Poindexter kind of a question. The insurance companies that are going to pay for music medicine treatment need to know what we call the underlying mechanism. How does it work? Just in the same way, you wouldn't give somebody penicillin if you didn't understand the mechanism. Well, there are these bacteria, and it's an antibiotic, and it's targeted, and this and that. They want to know the how before they'll pay for it. So that's one thing. The other thing is I'm embracing my intentional ignorance. And in the musical sphere, I want to record another album. I've got 2 albums of original material out.
Which are?
One is called Turnaround, named after the title song, which I co-wrote with George Harrison, sort of.
Oh, good little
Pretty cool.
way to bury the lead in terms of a name drop. It's like, well, he was hanging out writing songs with George Harrison. You might have heard of him. He produced Monty Python movies.
Yeah. Not exactly that way, but yes. Then the second record is called Sex and Math, because really that's everything. But I'm recording a new record, and what I'm invigorated by having performed some of the songs live. So last month I just performed a song at the Kennedy Center with Renee Fleming, who's a soprano, and like you, a big supporter of music and medicine. And we're grateful to you, Renee and I both, by the way, she asked me to convey this, for your support of this.
Renee Fleming knows who I am. That's interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, everybody knows who you are.
Man.
So, but performing live has given me a new sense of what I want to convey emotionally. And so in recording this next album and the songs that I'm writing for it, I'm entering this, I use the word ignorance. As you know, when you solo, if you're improvising, you have to forget everything you know about music theory and about what you've played before and just let it happen. And when I'm writing books, I studied a lot of English and writing. I took a lot of writing classes. But I have to forget all that, or it sounds manufactured or performative, to use your word. I have to just let it come out. Later, I can maybe go in and edit. So with this new batch of songs, I'm trying very hard to forget everything I know and just let my subconscious do the work.
That's amazing. But also, you have to know it so well to be able to let go of it.
I think I'm finally, there's always a lot to learn, but I think I've finally reached the level where I know enough anyway. I don't know it all, but I know enough that, yeah, I can just let it happen.
That's great. One last thing I want to bring up before we depart is this book is so fascinating. It goes to places
You're covering the title with your hand.
I never could have guessed. I mean, I don't know if anyone will be able to see that. I love this book, but also the coolest thing about it is you reference a ton of music in this, and there's a QR code on the back that goes to a playlist of all 260 songs that are mentioned in the book in chronological order. So you can kind of, you get to experience this book in multiple ways, and that is the coolest thing.
Yeah, that is really amazing.
I just love that. It's genius. I wish every book did that.
It's on audiobook too.
And you narrate it.
I do, yeah.
Cool.
But for rights reasons, I couldn't put the 260 songs in the audiobook because it would have costed
a bazillion dollars.
Like $5,000 for each song for the license for the book. So
my math is not good, but that's like $1,000.
Yeah, at least.
So before we say goodbye, there's one question that I have that is sort of informed by my own experience, but I won't talk about that. I just want to ask you, how has all your research, your subjective involvement with art and music and all of your research, being a PhD and your studies, how has it affected your spirituality and your sort of like cosmological worldview?
Well, one thing is PhD stands for piled higher and deeper. Having an advanced degree just means that you have many more things that you are asked to do than you can possibly do. The spirituality question is interesting, and thank you for asking. I think having knowledge and degrees affects people differently. In my case, the more I learn about the brain or about music or about people or about the world or the cosmos, the more mysterious I find it all. The more questions there are, the more ineffable it all seems. And so my sense of wonder at everything surrounding being alive and sentient has increased 1,000-fold. And I wake up every morning with a much deeper sense of curiosity than I had before. And I'll give you an example that may seem a bit pedestrian. I used to just see birds out the window and think, oh, that's cool. And I'd listen to them. And at some point, years ago, a friend of mine, Jeff Kimball, who was a bird watcher, taught me how to identify birds. Now I know there's an Oregon junco out my window, or an American goldfinch, or a towhee. And knowing their names enriches the experience enormously. And now I can associate certain voices and habits and food with that particular species. And when I see it, I feel a sense of gratitude and wonder that I didn't have before I knew that. Before they were just birds. They were nameless and faceless. And so with that as a microcosm or as just a tiny little anecdote, the whole world of spirituality has opened up to me by paying more attention to the corporeal world.
Yep, me too.
Yeah. Yeah, the corporeal world. I love that though. How the more you see, the more you can experience, and the more you see how our world is working together and all of the magic that's there that you might not have seen before.
And lastly, weirdly, because we all live in the same neighborhood, I find that my spiritual sense has been expanded. Weirdly, people don't think of LA as being like a place where you have actual, like, legitimate expanded spiritual awareness and experience. But for me, we live in a place where we're surrounded by birds, we're surrounded by trees, we're surrounded by plants. That to me has informed my sense of the spiritual more than anything. The complexity. You know, for you it's birds, for me it's trees. Like when I look at, I have sequoias on my property. When I look at a 90-foot tall sequoia and recognize, oh, it came from a tiny seed the size of my pinky nail, and somehow by that tiny seed containing DNA, it was able to create a 90-foot tall sequoia. The complexity, I don't know what it points to in terms of a cosmological understanding, but it's certainly more than the quotidian pedestrian world I had been inhabiting before.
Well, the three of us are lucky because this is a part of LA that's very verdant and very natural. And I didn't realize that LA had parts like this. I mean, I knew the Larchmonts and the Torrances and, you know, the idea that you could be surrounded by so much greenery and wildlife. We had P19 or P22, whatever he was called.
The mountain lion.
Yep.
In our neighborhood. And we still have bobcats come to my house and coyotes come down the street. And, you know, it's pretty full of nature.
Yeah, it's an actual phenomenal, complicated ecosystem in the middle of this strange, baffling city.
Yeah.
I feel very inspired to look at my experience of music differently and finished reading all of your amazing books because I didn't finish them all. And I'm sorry.
You're in good company.
But now I can text you and tell you how much
Anytime.
I love them.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming and for giving us so much of your time. I'm really, really grateful.
Thanks for having me.
So that was our wonderful conversation with Dr. Daniel Levitin, who we have established on occasion sings to donkeys.
He's a wonderful guy. I really hope you liked that episode as much as I personally enjoyed talking to him. And now we're friends, and he's great. I just want to say one more time, please call in and send a voice memo to the number in the show notes.
call that number. It costs nothing, and tell us how you are trying to stay sane in this baffling, ongoing apocalypse.
I can't wait to hear from you. Please keep it kind, and I can't wait to hear what you say.
And thank you to Dr. Daniel Levitin. Thank you to Bagel.
Another thanks to Bagel.
Most importantly, thank you, Bagel. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Erin Stehler. Thank you, Jonathan Nesvadba. Thank you to the nice people at Human Content.
And our friends at Cosmic Standard.
And our friends at Cosmic Standard. So many thank yous, but everybody is deserving of all of these thank yous.
Mm-hmm. So much gratitude for our people.
And here's a little hint. The last thing. So next episode, we're going to talk about how to stay sane during the apocalypse. There are many ways in which I think you and I both try to stay sane. One of which might be writing a disco song.
Oh, I already have some ideas going. I've got the lyrics. I got the dance moves. It's going to be a dance sensation.
Okay, so we'll see you and talk to you soon. And we'll be talking next time. We'll talk about how to stay sane during the apocalypse. And there might or might not be a disco song, but there will be a disco song.
Okay, see you guys next time.